I'm from Jilin province, and back in 1998, I started working as a driver in the Tili forest area of Heilongjiang, one of China's northernmost provinces. These forests are vast, with dense pines and birch trees that seem to stretch on forever. On August 11th, 2000, I headed out early in a 500 series pickup to deliver some supplies to the city, a round trip of about 283 kilometers, roughly 175 miles. All of it was rugged mountain road, winding between steep slopes and thick woods. My plan was to be back by 6 p.m., but on the return trip, I had to pick up old Zhang, the forest camp's cook, who had just quit his job and needed a ride home. He took a full hour and a half to pack, so by the time we finally got on the road, it was close to 6 o'clock, and we were only halfway back. The sky began to darken as we drove through endless stands of tall trees. These forests can get eerie fast, shadows deepen, and you suddenly realize there's not another soul in sight. To pass the time, I chatted with Zhang. Eventually, we arrived at a sharp bend near Yanwo Mountain Gorge. Zhang said he needed a bathroom break, so I pulled over and turned off the engine. A shocking discovery. When we were done, I was about to hop back in and start the truck when Zhang ran up to me, excited as a child. He'd seen a giant hare, light brown with thick fur, and it looked huge, easily around 20 pounds. Blood dripped from its head as he held it by the hind legs. Before I could ask how in the world he'd caught it, he told me he used to spend 3 years chopping meat in a restaurant kitchen. He'd gotten so adept with a cleaver that he could actually throw it with accuracy. Apparently, he hurled the blade at the rabbit and killed it instantly. Back at the truck, Zhang rummaged around in his luggage and pulled out some barbecue spices. He wanted to roast the rabbit right there by the riverbank. Now, cooking wild game in the open forest is illegal and dangerous. One small spark can cause a forest fire. But Zhang was adamant. He insisted we'd be quick, then we'd douse any flames. It was getting dark, and truth be told, I was hungry, so I reluctantly agreed. Zhang's skills were impressive. He butchered the rabbit with speed and efficiency, as if he'd done it 1,000 times. He even had skewers and marinade in his bag. We spent about an hour cooking on the riverbed. The meat itself was a bit tough with a distinct gamey smell. Folks in northern China sometimes call it a soil smell. And without vegetables to balance it out, it was rather greasy. By the time we finished eating, the sky was fully dark, and no other vehicle had passed by. We buried the bones in ashes, poured water on the fire to prevent any risk of forest fire, and headed back to the truck. That's when things went wrong. The engine wouldn't start. It was bizarre. Everything had been fine until that moment. Using a flashlight, we discovered the battery cables had gone soft and partly melted, though we couldn't figure out why. We wondered if there was a problem with the fuel injection or the diesel filter. Stranded in the dark, night had settled, and it was pitch black. Remember, this was the year 2000. Cell phones were uncommon in rural China, and there was no reception out here anyway. After nearly 40 minutes of tinkering, our flashlight battery was almost dead. Mosquitoes the size of dragonflies were swarming, and the truck still wouldn't start. Zhang and I agreed to wait in the truck, occasionally trying to turn the engine over. If any vehicle happened by, we'd flag it down for help. Worst case, we'd spend the night in the cab and wait for daylight. We switched off the flashlight to save its remaining juice and sat there in silence. August is the hottest month of the year in Heilongjiang. Rolling down the windows meant letting in swarms of mosquitoes, and keeping them rolled up left us in stifling heat. We still smelled of roasted meat and smoke from our impromptu barbecue. Zhang started to struggle. He took out a bedsheet and some extra clothes to cover himself, planning to sleep in the open back of the pickup. I told him to just be careful and not to smoke. That's when I remembered my little lifesaver, a device I always carried on long drives. The Mosi Deep Sleep Eye Massager. It had become all the rage in Silicon Valley, as the ads claimed, and I'd found it surprisingly helpful. I handed it to Zhang. He tried it out, and before long he was in a deep, snoring sleep in the truck bed. While Zhang slept, I stayed alert, planning to try the engine again in a bit. Our location was a narrow valley between two mountains, with a small river carving a path. Apart from the sound of running water, an occasional bird call, and some mysterious insects chirping deep in the forest, it was silent and dark. The kind of dark where you can't see your own hand in front of your face. At some point, I dozed off. I was half lying across the driver's seat when a strange sensation jolted me awake. Suddenly, I couldn't move. My whole body felt paralyzed. My limbs refused to respond, and I experienced a bizarre sense that my body was shrinking to the size of a speck of dust, then ballooning to something gigantic, like I was caught in a swirling vortex. My stomach churned as if I'd swallowed a rock, hard and painful, but I couldn't throw up. Worst of all, I sensed something massive behind me, close enough that I could feel its warmth. It was as big as the front end of my pickup, and its body felt covered in fur, radiating heat like an engine just turned off after running for hours. The combination of these sensations, paralysis, dizziness, nausea, and the presence of that hulking, furry form, was terrifying. I was drenched in sweat, unable to scream or even open my eyes properly. After a moment, I heard faint music, reminiscent of a traditional Cantonese folk piece I'd heard on the radio as a kid, but the tempo was off and slightly eerie. In my half-conscious state, I saw a thin, bald-headed boy in a white tank top and shorts, wearing black cloth shoes, common summer attire in rural China. He seemed about 7 or 8 years old. He was facing away from me, humming a tune I couldn't understand. As he sang, he smacked his lips, like he was savoring something, and he swayed in a strange little dance, head bobbing and arms twisting at the waist. Eventually, he glanced my way and continued shuffling closer, still humming. I tried desperately to move, but my limbs stayed locked. The child reached me, leaned in as if inspecting me from head to toe, then raised a foot and set it softly on my face. I could feel every stitch of the rough cloth shoe against my cheek. It didn't hurt, but it was horrifying. Suddenly, I managed to move a hand. I gasped, forcing myself upright with a jolt. My seat was empty beside me, the passenger side vacant, no giant furry beast in sight. I was soaked in sweat, heart hammering so hard I thought it might burst. My body felt weak. I glanced at my watch, around 4 or 5 a.m. Dawn would be breaking soon. I rolled down the window to let in fresh forest air. For a while, I slumped over the steering wheel, still too shaken to do anything else. Gradually, I calmed down enough to realize it had been a terrifying dream, or so I hoped. Then I heard a faint humming again, this time sounding like a grown man. My dizziness and nausea had passed, but now a different kind of fear took hold. I squinted outside and saw a shadow near the front of the truck. Checking the truck bed, I couldn't see Zhang. Switching on the flashlight, I got out to investigate. As I approached the front of the truck, the beam revealed Zhang, draped in his blue and white checked bedsheet, standing still with his back to me, hips swaying slightly. I called out, asking if he was all right, but he didn't respond, just kept humming that same eerie tune. When I got closer, I saw that Zhang's face looked strained. His eyebrows were furrowed, eyes tightly shut. He held a large stone close to his chest with one hand, while the other was moving near his face. It was unsettling to see him in such a state, still humming unintelligibly. He seemed completely unaware of my presence, so I cautiously reached out to touch his arm. The moment I did, Zhang stiffened and fell forward onto the ground in one solid motion, as if he had suddenly lost all control of his muscles. It was startling, like seeing a figure topple unexpectedly. I feared the worst. Shaken by the sight, I quickly retreated to the truck, turned off my flashlight, and attempted to start the engine once more. But to no avail. The battery was completely drained. Eventually, pale light crept into the sky. I mustered the courage to check on Zhang again. He was still face down on the ground. I shook him, and he groaned faintly. Relieved he was alive, I turned him over. His nose was scraped, and his face was dirty. He was a stocky man, around 5'4", about 160 centimeters, but well over 200 pounds, 90-plus kilograms. I half-dragged, half-carried him to the back seat of the truck. After washing his face with cold river water, he regained a bit of consciousness, though he was too dazed to speak. I used a small first aid kit I kept on board to clean and bandage his face. Around 7 a.m., a red Jeep Grand Cherokee belonging to the local forest police drove by. They saw Zhang's condition and became concerned that something terrible had happened, perhaps an accident. Zhang was incoherent. and my story of the night's events seemed unbelievable. I even took them to where we'd buried the rabbit bones. Nobody believed me, and I was taken to the local station for questioning while they took Zhang and his belongings away in their vehicle and towed my pickup. For hours, they questioned me, worried that Zhang might have been harmed. The Tili Forest area is fairly large, with a diverse population, and the authorities had to be sure of what had happened. It wasn't until noon that a supervisor from our forest camp arrived. I explained every detail, from the rabbit to the strange breakdown to the eerie episodes during the night. I even suggested maybe that bend in the gorge was haunted. My supervisor cautioned me. China in the early 2000s was very strict on superstitions, and he knew my mentioning the supernatural could cause more trouble. That afternoon, Zhang regained enough clarity at the local clinic to confirm most of my account. Only then was I released. It turned out Zhang had been carrying over 7,000 yuan, meant for his wife, so the police had been especially cautious about my involvement. When asked if he remembered the weird episode of holding a rock and acting strangely, Zhang only recalled dreaming about eating a traditional hot stew, watching a stage performance, and chatting with someone. He remembered slipping after finishing the food, but nothing else until the moment I helped him back into the truck. Later that night, his condition worsened, and he was sent to a bigger hospital, where he was diagnosed with forest encephalitis, a serious illness carried by ticks and mosquitoes in these dense woodlands. His illness explained his odd behavior and the fainting. My own dizzy spells and nightmares were likely an early sign of the same illness. Fortunately, my immune system must have fought it off. Zhang, however, wasn't as lucky. His condition left him with challenges that prevented him from returning to his job as a chef. The forest station eventually repaired my pickup, replacing the damaged fuel filter and the old battery. I paid the bill first and later got reimbursed. Life went on. I kept driving for the Forest Service, but I never touched rabbit meat again, and I refused to stop in that gorge. Not long afterward, the entire forest road system was upgraded, and that narrow, twisty stretch fell into disuse. The river's still there, maybe even a bit wider now, but the old road is just a memory. By winter of that same year, all our service vehicles were equipped with high-powered radios and basic GPS units. From then on, breaking down in the forest no longer meant being stranded without help. Northeastern China's woodlands can be formidable. Many stretches still have no cell signal, their thick canopy blocking both sunlight and mobile reception. But at least now, we can radio for help if the unexpected happens. I still look back on that night with a shiver, remembering the suffocating darkness, the terror I felt, the paralyzing dreams, and of course, Zhang's unusual episode by the truck headlights. Whether it was just the illness or something beyond our understanding, I'll never forget how vulnerable we are when caught in the wild, far from home and safety. I often wonder if the nightmares would have happened without that ill-fated rabbit roast by the river. But the past is the past. All I know is that the dense forests of Heilongjiang hold many secrets, and if you ever drive those roads, be prepared for the unexpected. This video is brought to y'all by Spaz Backwoods. If y'all dig tales like this one, don't forget to hit that subscribe button on my channel for more good stuff.